Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or evening, maybe good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Duff Johnston, and I'm an English language fellow here in Lima, Peru. And today I'll be introducing our speaker, Daniel Walsh, who's also an English language fellow here in Peru. We work with the Regional English Language Office, which is hosted at the U.S. Embassy in Lima, Peru. And this is our regular RELO Andes monthly webinar. So you can join us for our webinars the third Thursday of each month. For information about the topics and times, follow us on Facebook. So one thing I like about our webinars is we always start by asking people who are attending where you are joining us from today. And we get wonderful answers. So if you could, please, in the comments, tell us where you're joining us from today around the world. We'll post some answers too. Ecuador, I see. Bolivia, Peru. We get lots of people from the Andes region, but also around the world too. Ecuador. Yes. Hey, welcome neighbor from Lima, Evelyn. Let's see. If you haven't written, we have a Cusco guest today. That's where Daniel works and lives. And if you haven't written your location yet, please do so in the comments. Is there anybody not in the Andes region? Any place else in the world? Texas, excellent. Thanks for joining us, Juan. Chiclayo, very good. Iquitos, Peru. Another Lima audience member, Carlos. Welcome, Carlos. All right, so let's get started. So don't forget, the Friday after every webinar, we have a follow-up discussion for an hour on the next Friday. So tomorrow, Friday, April 21st, at 2 p.m. Lima time, we'll have a post-webinar discussion where Daniel and I will join you to talk about the content and the ideas in today's presentation. So you can find the information for the Zoom meeting for our discussion on Facebook. And please come tomorrow afternoon. We'd love to talk to you in person. And don't forget, next month, May 18th, at 2 p.m. on Thursday, we'll have our next RELO Andes webinar. And I should be the presenter next month. So come and see me talk some more about a topic on rubric design, which I think a lot of you are interested in and have experience with. So that's next month, Thursday, May 18th, 2 p.m. Lima time. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off now to Daniel Walsh. And before I do, I have to let you know that Daniel is in the Peruvian Amazon in Puerto Maldonado. So he may have some technical issues, but if there are, they will be very minor. So if there's any problem with his video or maybe a little problem with his audio, don't worry. We're prepared for it. And Daniel is too. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Daniel and I will let him go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. think that if you experience any difficulties, it might be with a frozen screen, but I think my audio will be okay. So we'll do the best we can. I apologize for any glitches. And Marcella is telling me things are going well thus far. All right. So here's a couple of objectives. So what we're trying to accomplish today is one, to draw connections between formative assessment, classroom activities, and feedback. And during this time, you'll also experience activities that reveal thinking, current understanding, and possible misconceptions. Um, and yeah, provide opportunities for feedback. That's actually an error. I should have eliminated that. I apologize. So just those first two bullet points. Here's our agenda, which will be a warm up connected to feedback. And then I'd like to give you what might be a somewhat new way or nuanced way of thinking about feedback. We'll watch a short video and do a self assessment. And then connected to this idea of formative assessment being connected to classroom activities, and those both formative assessments and classroom activities providing opportunities for feedback. We'll talk a bit about 3 moments in teaching reading, and we'll then do a little bit of a wrap up and some reiteration of next steps. Okay, here's your opportunity to jump into the comment section. So just take a moment to think about what was the last assignment or task you gave students feedback on? And was that feedback written, verbal, or both? And you can put the responses to both of those chat questions together in the same entry. So we'll give you a few minutes to think about that and to add your responses to the chat. So the last assignment or task you gave students feedback on, and was the feedback written, verbal, or both? So we've got some responses coming in from Jenny, an opinion paragraph, and the feedback was written. For Carmen, the feedback was both written and verbal. Carmen, if you want to add what the assignment or the task was, that would be great. So also please tell us what the task was, what the assignment was. Carmen, Jose, if you want to add that, since you've added both. Yeah, Jorge's added an assignment for a reading task and provided oral feedback. Okay. So Carmen, your assignment was an oral interaction and you provided both written and oral feedback. Give folks another 30 seconds or so to contribute. Mariteri, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, watched a video about overcoming poverty, and looks like you gave both written and verbal feedback on that. Juan Jose, an assignment about describing a picture using common adjectives, and you provided oral feedback and a few written comments as well. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this is a little bit of a deeper reflection, right? Thinking about was the feedback effective and how do you know? So we'll give you a minute to think about that. And if you have a response, certainly feel free to put it in the comments. But I think this helps us to also frame kind of how we're thinking about feedback, maybe in some different or some nuanced kind of ways, right? So think about this for a moment. Was the feedback effective, and how do you know? Then we'll move into some ways we'd like you to think about feedback for the purposes of this presentation here. Okay, so here's a few points we'd like you to consider and to keep in mind as we move through the presentation today. So a critical component of effective feedback is focusing on what matters most, right? And the reason for that statement is that we as teachers can't possibly provide feedback on everything, right? So how do we very purposefully decide what it is we're going to provide feedback on? And that moves us into the next statement, which is that revealing thinking and how understanding is developing around a topic or a concept is key, right? Um, and embedded within that second thought is the idea that students already come to us with some ideas about most of the topics that we're teaching, right? And so it's important that we understand what some of those insights might be, right? So we'll look at kind of a classroom activity that could also serve as formative assessment, that also provides opportunity, right, for feedback that starts to reveal thinking, right? And lastly, kind of a reiteration here, daily activities can provide formative assessment and feedback opportunities on thinking and understanding. Next slide. Okay, so thinking about this idea of feedback, we're going to play a short video, and this video contains 6 tips that support the less is more feedback. The less is more principle with feedback, right? So we want to provide feedback that is both effective, right? And for the purposes of us as teachers and for our students, right, is sustainable, right? So in other words, teachers can only provide so much feedback, right? And students can only receive and respond to so much feedback, right? So we have to be more selective in the types of feedback that we provide, right? So in this video, you'll see a little bit more about these 6 points here. The 1 in 4 rule, students self-assess, use tech tools strategically, peer feedback, recognize and eliminate busy work, and this idea of show me your best work, right? So this video is about 3 minutes. And as we're watching, if you would identify one of these 6 that you think you do well right now, or that you have done well, and also identify one that you would want to improve and add that to the chat. And what that might look like, excuse me, for example, is, well, I do peer feedback, so you can abbreviate a little bit, right? Improve, I want to recognize and eliminate busy work, right? So just use some shorthand to express in the same comment box what it is that you think that you do well and what it is you think you would like to improve. Okay, and with that said, we will go ahead and begin the video. Great, thank you. Yeah, please feel free to add to the chat. Duff, can we go back a slide, please? And list something that you think you do well and one that you would like to improve. So you see the list of 6 there. Take a moment to add one of those that you think you do well and one you would like to improve. Deanna, I see you added that you like tip 6. Does that mean that you do it well or you would like to do it some more? Something to improve upon. So we'll give you a minute or so to add to the comments. One you do well, one you would like to improve. Thank you, Deanna. You would like to do it some more, yeah. All right, some comments coming in. Juan Jose writes, I love doing number 3. Yeah, I think we have to find, as teachers, we have to find really purposeful ways to do that. And one would like to improve number 2 with student self-assessing. Yeah, that's very powerful when we can teach students to do that well. Freddie writes, would like to improve peer assessment. Yep, same, number 2. And yes, really useful but challenging. You're right. I remember struggling with how to teach students to give feedback that their peers can actually do something with, right? That will help them to improve. Jenny writes, oh, let's see. Oh, no, sorry, skipping a few. Jacqueline, student self-assessing. Ah, that's a popular one. Peer support and feedback. Yep. Self-assessment and peer assessment. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, these are common themes here. Using tech tools for Jimena. Um, Deanna writes, I think I do the second one well, student self-assessing. Ah, Deanna, maybe you should come tomorrow at 2 and give us some of your tips, and others could join. Yeah, then it's easier for them to integrate my feedback. Yeah. And Deanna would like to improve point 5, which is recognize and eliminate busy work. Yeah, that's a really important one. Sometimes as teachers, we have a hard time letting go, right, of assignments, even though they might not be so productive for students or for us, right? Milva writes, using tech tools and want to improve giving peer feedback. Yeah, very common theme. Milva, maybe you can come tomorrow also and give us some of your expertise on tech tools for providing feedback. Jacqueline writes, yes, tech tools. Yes, all right. Okay, thank you all for your contributions. That was great. Next slide, please, Duff. Okay, so as I said in the beginning, one way to rethink feedback, right, is to ensure that it's connected to formative assessments and classroom activities, right? And more specifically, classroom activities that help to reveal how students are thinking about a particular topic, right? So this is something that I turn to frequently, called the 3 moments in teaching reading. And those 3 moments are preparing the learner, interacting with the text, and extending learning. And we're primarily going to focus on preparing the learner, the first one, and that's primarily due to time constraints, but we'll give you a little bit of information about interacting with the text and extending learning. And then we're going to extend an invitation to you to talk more about these 3 moments. So stay tuned for that. And with that, we'll move on to the first moment. Right? So the first moment, as I stated, is preparing the learner, right? And the reasons for this are the following, right? One, it validates learners' funds of knowledge, right? That they're students come to the table, or students come to the table with social, cultural, and linguistic backgrounds that are assets, and we should try to uncover what those are. And they also have come to school with experiences from their own communities. And it's important that we learn about those and understand those because that influences how they understand the content that we're presenting to them. Secondly, this first moment draws connections to learner's schema to build prior knowledge to class content, right? So we want to, this is very much connected to the first one, but we really want to deliberately understand how students understand the topic at hand, and then use that as an opportunity to build. Um, and by build, I also mean there might be opportunities to correct misconceptions, right? And this first moment also prepares learners for the themes, vocabulary, concepts, and disciplinary language that they will encounter later. And moment one tasks are typically, they don't always have to be, but they can typically be very heavily interactive and encourage students to exchange ideas between and among themselves, right? And let's move on to the next slide. So the way that you experienced, so I built this moment one into this presentation, right? So the way that I was preparing you to think about feedback was responding to those questions, right? Connected to the last time you gave, what the last assignment you gave feedback on was it effective? And you did a self-assessment based on that short video. So it was deliberately kind of preparing you to engage in this topic of feedback, right? The activity accounted for your prior experiences as teachers, right? As well as your knowledge. And it set the stage to deepen our conversations about feedback, right? And you interacted through primarily through the chat here, right? Another way to prepare learners is through the deliberate and strategic development of vocabulary connected to a theme. And I make this a part of the presentation because I'm sure that you have all seen this, and I've been guilty of this myself, right? That before we have students do some reading, we give them a list of, I don't know, 10 to 20 vocabulary words, right? Um, and that is, shown not to be particularly effective, right? So might some alternatives to that long list of vocabulary words be? And here's one suggestion that follows on the next slide. This is called a Freyer model. And if I'm curious if any of you have seen this or used it before. If you have, if you want to just write a quick note in the comments, that would be great. And Deanna has written, pre-teaching vocabulary is something that is even suggested in several books. Yes, I agree. And pre-teaching very purposefully, right? So this is what you see here is one way that we can do that, right? So this Freyer model, you can see here that at the top left, there's quadrants with an oval in the middle, and that oval is orange, right? Which means that it's an adjective, right? If you look at the key where the verb is green, the noun is blue, etc., right? So here you would choose very what I would call high leverage words, right, for the purpose of your teaching. And you could have students, let's say, for example, that we chose 5 of those words. We could have students work in groups to complete this chart, right, after providing a model, right? So this is step 1, which sets the context, right? And it encourages students to also use their home language resources, because there's an area here for students to translate, as you see. These words can also be represented in images, right, which is powerful for some students, if not all students, right? And secondly, if we move into the morphology, right, we can look at the ways that words change, right, the way that they move from one form of speech to another, right? So, for example, we could have the word experiment as a noun or as a verb, right? And then we can have the noun experimentation, right? Or we could have the gerund experimenting, right? So this encourages students to play with words a bit, and it actually helps them to expand their recognition of words that have similar roots, right? And box 3 there with cognates encourages them again to use their home language resources to think about, well, are there cognates in my own language, right? And of course, if you're working with, I think we are all English and or Spanish speakers on the call here today, that you would find that there's about 70% of the words between English and Spanish are cognates. And of course, that applies to other Romance languages as well. Okay. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So this is another way for moment 1, right? Preparing the learner is to really identify key words that students will really dive into, right? The second moment, and again, we're not going to do much with this today, but just so you have an idea of the whole schema of things, right, is to interact with the text. And this supports learners to construct meaning from various types of texts, particularly through deconstructing the text, right, focusing on a meaningful chunk, connecting learners' understanding of that chunk to the larger whole, right? And lastly, establishing connections between ideas. And moment 2 tasks can be both individual and interactive. And what follows here on the next slide is an example of what that might look like. So this is a triple entry journal, as you see here, right? And in the first column, the student selects a piece of the text, right? Finding a quote that resonates with them or makes them ask themselves questions, right? And that's the text says. And the middle column is I say, and that's where we ask students to do some interpretation, right? What does this text mean to you? And lastly, in the right-hand column, looking at the screen, we ask students to really think about the so of it all, right? Where there's some evaluation. So what? Why is this important? What is the impact, right? And lastly, you can see there's a note that reads, use your notes from the frames above to write a claim, synthesizing your reaction to the text. Right, so you can see how this might help students, for example, to form a thesis statement around a particular idea and make connections to texts. So that's a quick example of moment number 2. And moment 3 is extending the learning, right? Which can also be thought of as creative application, right? And Aida Walke, who I draw some of these ideas from, calls these invitations, right? So invitations are intentionally designed tasks for novel or creative application, right? Students are apprentices, right? They're learning, right, from their peers and from you, and they have opportunities to engage with a lot of texts around the same ideas. and to connect with their peers in order to apply their learning, right? And typically these invitations, right, as the title implies, extend the learning, right? And here's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can recreate the text in a new genre or create new text to represent new understanding. You can apply new gained knowledge to novel situations or to problem solve. And lastly, you can connect ideas learned to other ideas and experiences outside of the text, right? So these are ways that we encourage the extension of learning through creative applications. And on the next slide. Okay, so we're going to start to wrap us up a little bit. So would love to hear from some of you all how you've used these 3 moments in your own teaching practice, right? So when you think about engaging students with ideas, right, and ideas that are represented in texts, right, how do you prepare them to explore those ideas in texts, right? And remember, this is because we want to reveal their thinking about these ideas so that we can start to think about ways to provide feedback on their understanding of concepts, right? So I think that that's really key, right? So we'll give you a few minutes. We're good with time here to write in the comments any way that you have used any of these 3 moments, or perhaps used all 3 of them in conjunction with one another. So I'm going to mute my mic here for a moment and give you all a chance to craft some responses. I think I cut myself off. And Deanna really likes the idea of thesis statement creation connected to the triple entry journal. Yeah, I like the triple entry journal as well. Okay, we'll give you a few minutes to respond to the question you see here on the slide. Okay, we've gotten a few responses. Jorge writes, this is really a student-centered approach. Yes, it is by design, right? If you remember, I've said a couple of times, right, that we want to really kind of tap into students, prior knowledge, their cultural understandings of, the concepts that we're addressing. So it is very much designed um, to to help teachers to see more of how their students are thinking. Yes. Um, yeah. Before reading a text, speaking. Uh-huh. Yeah, Deanna writes, I've used KWL charts. Yeah, that's a very common kind of teaching technique. Yeah, mind maps. Yes, also great. Great strategy to help reveal kind of student thinking. And it provides because it provides a window into thinking, right, also provides some opportunity for feedback should they have any misconceptions, right? Discussions to get students to apply what they have learned in the text and to give their opinions. Yep, always that very, very structured discussions around a text are particularly effective, I have found. Mind maps. Yeah, post phase is used. Yeah. Post phase. Right, students just catching up with some of the entries here. Thank you for all of your writing. Yeah, the post phase is used to invite students to personalize. Yeah, I think that's important. You can have them make connections to their own experiences. Carmen writes, activating prior knowledge, the task itself, and ended up with a communicative task. Make students well prepared. Yeah. Deanna says she really likes the extending the learning section, right? And that's important because it gives students the opportunity to be creative, right? Number one, and also to apply their learning, right? Both of those are really key. Students, Misael writes, I encourage my students to ask and answer questions. It's a great way to get students to delve more deeply into the text, right? Is to encourage them to craft questions for their peers. Yeah. It's a great way to both prepare learners and interact with the text. Okay, give me another 30 seconds. Any last comments? Yes. Marcella, thank you for thanking folks for their responses. Okay, I think that about covers it. So we'll move into some last announcements. All right, so one more comment from Juan Jose before we move on. Yes, students looking for titles, subtitles, and pictures in the reading. Yeah, that's really effective with, particularly effective with nonfiction texts, right? That tend to have those subtitles and things along those lines. It helps to kind of activate prior knowledge about topics and things along those lines, right? And when you ask students to engage with that, that could also start to reveal, right, some of their current understanding about the big ideas that are presented in the text. So it provides, as I've stated before, provides opportunities for both assessment and feedback. Yep. Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you for that comment, Juan Jose. And last few announcements here. So remember, we always have a Friday follow-up to this, and I'll turn it over to Duff to wrap us up.
Yeah, so Daniel, I really love these ideas for reading. We've gotten a lot of requests from teachers who want to make their reading more engaging for students and more motivating. And I think what you've presented is definitely, as one of the teachers wrote today, it's a student-centered approach. I think traditionally reading, the text is held up or the author is held up as the authority, and the student's only job is to read carefully and understand everything and then answer questions. And there's little room for the student's personal lived experience to come in, their imagination, their life experience, creativity. And I think this approach is wonderful because not only does it um, engage them, but teachers, like you're saying, Daniel, you're able to see the student thinking every step of the way. And that's a place where you can get involved to correct misconceptions or to get them to see other points of view that are really going to be helpful for them moving forward. Yeah, we encourage you to come tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you have some reading tasks that you've done with or without 3 moments like this, or that maybe you would like to try in the future, please come and share with us tomorrow. We'd love to have a conversation and hear what you do with reading and how you give students feedback on their engagement with reading or any other kind of activity. And Daniel, I think the same stuff works with more extensive listening projects too, like listening to interviews, news reports, anything that you can kind of break up into sections. The same approach works very well. So again, that's going to be tomorrow, 2 p.m. Lima time, Friday, April 21st. Come and join us for an hour discussion on Zoom, and the details and the Zoom link will be available on Facebook. You have to register, though, before the Zoom session, so make sure to go there soon. Register for the Zoom discussion and join Daniel and me tomorrow afternoon. And don't forget, a month from now, Thursday, May 18th, 2 p.m. Lima time, we'll have a session on rubric design. I should be the host of this webinar next month. And please come and join us. I know a lot of you are using rubrics. You have advice for us, and maybe we can give you some tips to improve your rubric design and even use. So that's it for us today. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the US, in the Andes, maybe on the other side of the world. We enjoyed meeting you, hearing some of your teaching experiences and your hopes for the future, how to improve your own feedback. Thank